In a landmark decision that will be studied for generations, the Supreme Court has sharply limited the president's authority, sending ripples through the highest levels of government and the global economy. Specifically, the court has restricted the president's power to impose sweeping tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, a law that has long granted the executive branch broad discretion in times of international crisis. The case at the heart of this decision, American Institute for International Steel v. United States, directly challenged the Trump administration's use of IEPA to levy broad tariffs on imported goods, particularly steel and aluminum, arguing that such actions overstepped constitutional boundaries and bypassed congressional oversight. This ruling stands as a major judicial check on presidential power, reasserting Congress's constitutional role in shaping and regulating trade policy, a responsibility that had gradually shifted toward the executive over recent decades. The court's decision effectively unwinds tariffs that had disrupted global supply chains, increased costs for American manufacturers, and created economic volatility for businesses and consumers alike. By curbing the president's unilateral authority, the ruling promises a more stable and predictable commercial landscape for both domestic and international markets. More importantly, this decision forces a national reckoning over decades-old laws that have allowed presidents to act with sweeping discretion in matters of foreign commerce, often with limited input from Congress or the public. By reining in the executive's use of emergency statutes for economic restructuring, the Supreme Court has recentered Congress in U.S. trade policy, reminding lawmakers of their vital constitutional responsibilities. Lawmakers are now challenged to reclaim their constitutional authority in this critical area, sparking renewed debate over the balance of power between the legislative and executive branches and the future of American trade policy. The decision sets a powerful new precedent for how America engages with the world, redefining the legal and political dynamics of trade, diplomacy, and economic strategy on the global stage. The shockwaves from this historic ruling will shape presidential power, congressional authority, and America's role in the world for decades to come, marking a turning point in the nation's constitutional and economic history. The conflict began with President Trump's aggressive use of tariffs, justified under IEPA, to bypass Congress and reshape U.S. trade policy. Businesses and industry groups quickly challenged this, arguing IEPA was meant for targeted sanctions, not broad economic restructuring. They claimed the administration stretched the definition of national emergency to cover long-standing trade issues, not extraordinary threats. The administration countered that foreign economic policies threatened U.S. security, justifying emergency action. This legal battle became a test of how far presidential authority can go under old statutes. At its core, the case questioned whether a law from the 1970s could be used as a permanent tool for economic protectionism. The stage was set for a major constitutional showdown over the separation of powers. The legal challenge rested on the Constitution's Commerce Clause, which gives Congress, not the President, the power to regulate foreign trade. The framers placed this authority in Congress to ensure major economic decisions reflected public debate and compromise. Over time, Congress delegated some trade powers to the executive for efficiency, but the Trump administration's use of IEPA pushed these limits. Plaintiffs argued that while Congress can delegate, it cannot surrender its core responsibilities. The Supreme Court's ruling reaffirms that the Commerce Clause is a real constraint on executive action. The President's emergency powers are not a blank check for broad tariff regimes. Congress retains ultimate authority over America's economic relationships. This marks a significant recalibration of the balance of powers in trade policy. At the heart of the dispute was IEPA's original purpose. Crafted in the late 1970s, the law was meant to give the president targeted tools for responding to genuine foreign crises, such as international conflicts or threats to national security, not sweeping economic authority that could be used at will. Lawmakers designed IEPA as a shield, not a sword, to address emergencies that could not be anticipated, ensuring the president could act quickly but within clear boundaries. Critics argued the administration abused IEPA, wielding it as a sledgehammer for broad economic policy, rather than the precise scalpel intended for true emergencies. They warned that using IEPA to impose tariffs or regulate trade on a large scale undermined the checks and balances built into the law, and risked setting a dangerous precedent for future presidents to bypass Congress on major economic decisions. The law's legislative history shows Congress intended it for precise, targeted sanctions, such as freezing assets or blocking transactions with hostile nations, not for imposing broad tariffs or restructuring the economy. Lawmakers debated these limits extensively, emphasizing the need to prevent executive overreach. In response, the administration pointed to IEPA's broad language, claiming it allowed the president to regulate imports and exports as a matter of national security, especially when foreign competition or trade deficits were at stake. They argued that the law's flexibility was essential for protecting American interests in a rapidly changing world. This interpretation, if accepted, would give the president near plenary power over trade and economic policy during any declared emergency, effectively allowing the executive branch to bypass Congress and reshape the economy under the guise of national security. The Supreme Court was tasked with scrutinizing whether issues like trade deficits or foreign competition truly qualified as unusual and extraordinary threats under IEEPA, or if such uses stretch the law beyond its intended limits. In a landmark decision, the court rejected the administration's broad reading, clarifying that IEEPA's emergency powers cannot be used as a tool for long-term economic restructuring or to address routine policy disagreements. The justices emphasized that emergency powers must remain exceptional, not a blank check for executive action. The decision preserves IEPA's original focus on real, immediate foreign policy crises, such as acts of war, terrorism, or sudden threats to national security, rather than ongoing economic challenges. Ultimately, the ruling draws a clear line between emergency action and general economic policymaking, reaffirming the separation of powers and ensuring that extraordinary authority remains reserved for extraordinary circumstances. Central to the case was the Major Questions Doctrine, which requires clear congressional authorization for executive actions of vast economic significance. Challengers argued that imposing massive tariffs was a major question needing explicit approval from Congress, not vague statutory language. The administration claimed IEPA's broad grant of authority was enough, especially in national security matters. The Supreme Court disagreed, applying the doctrine to presidential use of IEPA. The majority held that restructuring the economy through tariffs demands a direct, unambiguous mandate from Congress. This extends the Major Questions Doctrine to presidential actions in foreign commerce. The ruling sets a new higher bar for executive power in economic policy. The case began in the Court of International Trade, where the government initially prevailed. On appeal, the Federal Circuit showed more skepticism, leading to a divided ruling that highlighted deep judicial disagreement. The government petitioned the Supreme Court, given the national importance and conflicting lower court opinions. The justices heard arguments on statutory interpretation, constitutional authority, and the Major Questions Doctrine. Their final ruling resolved one of the most significant legal challenges to executive power in recent history. The years-long legal fight over tariffs created deep uncertainty for American businesses and the global economy. Companies faced unpredictable costs, delayed investments, and complex supply chain decisions. Data showed the tariffs' instability hurt economic growth, with consumers and importers bearing most of the costs. The legal limbo made long-term planning nearly impossible, chilling investment and fueling market volatility. Even after the Supreme Court's decision, the economic aftershocks will linger. Businesses may not easily revert supply chains, and prices may stay elevated. The episode highlights how legal and political ambiguity in trade policy imposes real economic burdens. Stability and clear rules are essential for growth and confidence. The administration defended the tariffs as vital to national security, arguing that declining industries threatened America's defense capabilities. Critics saw this as a pretext for protectionism, noting that many tariffs targeted allies and had tenuous links to security. The government insisted the president should have broad discretion in assessing threats. The Supreme Court, however, ruled that EEPA was not the right tool for broad economic challenges, even if national security is invoked. The decision limits the president's ability to use emergency powers for sweeping economic measures. It reinforces that statutory limits matter, even in the name of security. The Supreme Court's recent decision marks a pivotal moment that will fundamentally reshape American trade policy and the delicate balance of power between the branches of government. This ruling is not just a legal technicality, it signals a new era in how the United States approaches its economic relationships with the world. From now on, presidents can no longer rely on broad emergency statutes to impose sweeping tariffs or trade restrictions without explicit and direct approval from Congress. This change limits the executive branch's ability to act unilaterally on major trade issues, ensuring that such impactful decisions are subject to greater scrutiny and democratic input. As a result, future administrations will be compelled to work much more closely with Congress, fostering a climate of collaboration, negotiation, and open debate. This could lead to more transparent and well-considered trade policies that better reflect the diverse interests of the American people. Congress is now presented with a renewed opportunity to reclaim its constitutional authority over trade and to clarify the laws that govern America's economic interactions. Lawmakers will need to step up, define clear guidelines, and take responsibility for the nation's trade direction. While the executive branch still retains some influence under other statutes, the legal battleground has unmistakably shifted. The president's power is now more constrained, and the courts have signaled that checks and balances must be respected. The ongoing tension between the need for swift executive action and the importance of legislative oversight will continue to shape the future of American trade. This dynamic is likely to spark new debates and perhaps even further legal challenges. The Supreme Court's ruling is a significant turning point, but it is far from the final word in the ongoing struggle over who controls America's trade policy. The story is still unfolding, and future conflicts are almost certain. Ultimately, this decision reaffirms the separation of powers as a vital safeguard for both economic stability and the health of American democracy. It reminds us that no single branch should dominate such critical decisions. The central question now is clear. Will Congress rise to the challenge and actively shape the future of American trade, or will executive power find new avenues to expand its reach? The answer will define the next chapter in America's economic story.